Welcome to Avigilon Unity. In this video, we are covering Assa Abloy AH-30 Gen 5 configuration with Avigilon Unity Access. Let's take a look at the requirements. You will need to have Avigilon Unity version 6.50.4.4 and above, an Assa Abloy AH-30 Gen 5 hub, and Mercury LP controllers, LP 1501, 1502, 2500 or 4502, and you must have firmware version 201. So before you upgrade, the process only applies to Mercury LP boards, again LP 1501, 1502, 2500 and 4502. The old EP boards are not supported for firmware 2.x or Assa Abloy AH-30 Gen 5. The AH-30 Gen 5 is not compatible with any previous version, AH-30 Gen 4 or AH-40. Also, the AH-30 Gen 5, that's the new hub, cannot have any up or downstream controllers or subcontrollers. Only Gen 5 AH-30 hubs. So here's an example how this will work. So assuming that you already have something deployed, let's say a LP or even an EP board over RS-485 with one or multiple AH Gen 4 hubs and even maybe a downstream subcontroller, subpanel, Mercury subpanel. If one of those AH-30 Gen 4s stop working and you need to replace them, you cannot add them to the same line. They're just not compatible with older versions. You will need an LP controller running firmware 201 or above over RS-485, and you can have one or multiple AH-30 Gen 5 only. Nothing else should be under this controller. Here is I won't say an exception, but here's how you can treat that. If you have an LP 2500 or 4502, those boards do have two RS-485 lines. In that case, in one line, you could have a Mercury subpanel and an NH-30 Gen 4, and in the other line you can have one or multiple AH-30 Gen 5s. Again, you cannot mix them. You cannot have any Mercury subpanel or previous versions of the AH-30 sitting in the same line. Some of the considerations for the firmware upgrade. Here's the process. So to upgrade the Mercury LP controller to version 2.1, you will first have to upgrade to version 3.1.x. Right now is 3.31.0 is the current version. So you have to upgrade to that first. And after that, once the upgrade is completed, then you can proceed to go to the next upgrade, which is version 2.01. Take in consideration that this upgrade process is very unusual and it will take much longer than previous firmware versions. So you can take up to 30 minutes per upgrade due to the size of this firmware update. Very, very important during this process, do not try to reboot the controller or restart this process or unpower the controller, power it back, or do anything to the controller, because that might disable or break the board, rendering it unusual. So once you have the controller configured with the firmware version 2.0.1, then you can proceed to add the AH-30. So when you go into your controller, you'll be adding under the subpanel tab, you'll be adding an AH-30 Gen 5. and you want to make sure that once you get to that controller, there is no sub panels added to that controller. So you can have an AH-30 Gen 5 there, but nothing else. So on the same RS-485 line, you can only have AH-30 Gen 5. So once you have the AH-30 added to Avigilon Unity Access Control, right after that, you're going to reboot the controller, and the AH-30 should be online after that. So let's go ahead and take a look in the software and see how that looks like. Okay, so this is my panel is already configured here. So I'm already logged in ACM, and I'm looking at in a LP2500 that has very old firmware, and the idea is to upgrade it. Even ACM is showing in here that I should be at least in 130.3. Now, because I'm going to update to version 2.0, I don't need to upgrade to that version. I can go directly to what I'm going to show you in a few minutes. So another thing here is in subpanels. Notice that I don't have anything in here. I could have the AH-30 Gen 5 already configured, and then I can go and upgrade that to the firmware 2.01. You cannot have any other subpanel if you are installing or if you configure an AH-30 Gen 5 in the controller. Okay, so let's go ahead. In this case, go back here. In this case, I could, because this controller is an LP2500, so it does have two RS-485 ports, so I could have Mercury boards and AH-30 Gen 4 in one port, in one RS-485 port, and on the other one I can only have AH-30 Gen 5. I can have multiple units, but has to be an AH-30 Gen 5. So let me go ahead and show you how to upgrade this process, how to update the firmware. So again, running an older firmware, that is okay. I'm gonna click here and look for my firmware. Notice that this process that I'm showing now only applies to LP controllers. Notice here's the EPs, and these are the latest version, 129.2. So I'm going to scroll down, and in my particular case here, look for a LP4502, and I'm going to upgrade. This is the first one that I need to do. I'm going to upgrade to 131.0. Then after that, when that comes back, then I will upgrade to this version over here. This one that you see over here, this upgrade from 2.0 to 2.01, is only used in the case that you already have a Mercury LP controller that has firmware 2.0 already installed. In that case, you want to upgrade to 2.01, has some improvements, some bug fixes, and this is the one that we suggest you stay on. If there's a new install, like in my case here, my controller has an older firmware, I'm gonna go ahead and install this firmware first. It's going to take up to 30 minutes, so you need to be patient on this. Do not reboot the controller. Do not change anything. You will not get any information on screen. Once this process starts, you just want to leave in there until the firmware is updated and the controller comes back. So let's go ahead and do that. Literally just follow the line here. Click in that icon there. I'm going ahead and confirm. And now the firmware update command has been sent. I can go over here to the status page and just stay in there, and this is going to tell me that a firmware download is in process. So right now I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'll come back as soon as this is done. I just noticed something interesting here. I waited a few minutes, and the message was saying here download firmware in progress went away. But the controller is still, I can look in the lights in the controller, and it's still going through the update process, adding the blocks of software, the firmware version into that controller. So we want to wait until it reboots, and you will see a change on firmware version over here. So don't do anything. Although the message here disappeared, don't do anything to it. Just let it sit in here until this changes version. So I'll come back as soon as I see the change in version over here. Okay, the controller just came back and took about 5 minutes to do it. But again, expect this duration of time to change depending on what you have on the network and what type of controller it is, how much stuff is happening in the computer, so this might vary. So you want to plan for extended period of time that this will take to do an upgrade. So now I know that my controller here is all good, is running, and is on firmware 130.1. I haven't refreshed the screen yet, that's why this message is still here. So I'm gonna go ahead and refresh that, and that message now went away, right? I only had that message again because I was running a very old firmware, and I was just trying to show that I can go from an older firmware directly into a 1.31.0. So now that this firmware is here, is configured, is showing that I have the firmware in here and my controller is running normally, I'm gonna go ahead and click in firmware again, scroll down to LP2500, that's the one that I'm running, and I'm gonna go here to the migration from a 131.x to version 2.0.1. Keep in mind that this process, there is no return to 131.0. Once you move to 2.0, you cannot put this controller back to 131. So let's go ahead and click here. And it's asking me if I want to go ahead and upgrade that. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Firmware command sent. Again, I can scroll up, go over here to status, and just leave it there. It should tell me firmware upgrade in progress. My understanding is that this firmware does take a little longer to upgrade. So if the information disappears, that this firmware download in progress disappear from here, do not assume that the controller is done. Wait until it reboots, comes back with all green status in here, and you see the 2.01 firmware in this area right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause the video, and I'll come back when I have that updated. Okay, we're back. So the controller took about, I would say, 15 minutes to upgrade to version 2.01. One thing that I noticed difference in the 2.01 upgrade is that in a point after the controller received the file, it rebooted, and this all went red and yellow here, meaning it's disconnected from the controller. And then the controller stayed disconnected for about 5 minutes, I would say. And it was just, I was looking at the LEDs, and they were just turning and doing things. So in other words, it was loading or doing something to load that firmware into that controller. After that, just came back, and here it is 2.01. So as I said in the beginning, you need to be patient. Don't change anything. Don't reboot the controller. Just wait. It will come back, and it will show you the latest version. So now that we're here, we are updated. Controller is ready to go to do what you need to do with it. Next, let's go ahead and show you how to configure the AH-30 Gen 5 in this controller. So I'm going to go ahead and go here to subpanels. Again, got nothing here. There's no subpanels added. And because this is a LP2500, I could actually have two RS-485 lines, so I could configure multiple boards and Gen 5s in a separate line. So I'm going to go ahead and click there, add the control, add the subpanel. I'm just going to call this AH-30 Gen 5, like that. This is located, this is handy if you want to know where this is physically located. So I'll just do this as an example. It is located in IDF 123. And then I'm going to come here and add the AH-30. So in previous versions, you would see the Imperial 121 or the Imperial 128. This is the old AH-30 Gen 4. The new one, AH-30 Gen 5, is this one right here. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. Mine is configured in port 1, and again, because this is a LP2500, I could pick port 1 or 2. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'm going to click installed. I have configured the dip switches on the AH-30 as address 1, so I'm just going to go ahead and here and hit save. Now that is configured, so it's ready to go. If I go back to status, I should see that not in a working condition. So I need to do one more thing before this is all said and done. I need to go ahead now and hit this reset and download. This is something that HID and Mercury are working on it to correct this issue. In this firmware, once you finish configuring the AH-30 Gen 5, you need to come here and hit this reset download, and this will reinitiate the controller and should pick the AH-30 Gen 5 and turn it online. And here it is, the panel just came back online, and with it, the AH-30 Gen 5 now is online. Now the next step, if you haven't configured that yet, is to use the Avigilon software to link the wireless lock to the AH Gen 5 hub.